So you're buying real estate off plan and the contract includes a payment schedule. You're asked to review the contract and you need a better understanding of how a payment schedule works. Let's look into it. So what is a payment schedule? If you buy a real estate that already exists, it's a one-day transaction basically. You give money, you get the real estate on the same day, ideally in the same transaction. So no payment schedule involved. There's also basically no risk. You transfer your money and you get something. If the transfer of the object does not go through, typically the money would also be stopped somewhere along the way. So from a risk point of view, there's nothing to worry about here. It gets very different when the construction still needs to happen and you don't want to pay all the money up front. And it would also be stupid because you carry the risk. Let's say you pay everything up front for something you get delivered in 3 years' time, or you're supposed to get delivered in 3 years' time. On a construction project, you need to manage your cash flow and, more important, your risk. You have the risk that the developer goes bankrupt or doesn't deliver in time. Now, there are so many reasons why the developer might not deliver in time, and it happens all the time. It's not just a hypothetical risk, it's very, very real. The idea of a payment schedule is that you pay step by step as the construction progresses. So the construction is broken down in a couple big steps. Let's say construction of the foundation, the walls, the roof, and everything inside, maybe furniture separate. So you have 4 or 5 blocks. Plus, of course, you have the land, you have overhead. The developer will include some profit in the calculation. He needs to keep some reserves for the warranty phase, and there will be a sales commission somewhere included in the sales price as well. So what is a reasonable approach here? Taking the whole construction as one block, you could pay everything up front, you could pay everything in the end. Now, what would be wrong with either of these? If you pay everything up front, as a buyer, you have the risk that the developer does not deliver, maybe takes your money and runs, takes your money and goes bankrupt, takes the money and buys something else. If you pay everything in the end, then the developer has the risk that you don't pay, that at the end of the construction period, you are not there as promised with a bag of money. The developer would only have your signature on a piece of paper, basically. So at the end of the construction period, you might not be willing or able to pay up. Plus, if you have any change requests throughout the construction period, you want a different interior design or something like that, why would the developer cater for these additional requests if he's afraid that you might not be there to actually take over at the end? So the developer has a need to balance his cash flow needs and also his risk. He wants some money up front just to make sure the buyer doesn't run away. Plus, he also needs the money to finance the construction work all along the way. He will have lots of bills to pay throughout the years of construction. And typically, some of the expenses need to be carried up front by the developer. For example, buying the land, that can be a big piece of money, and he needs to pay the bill up front. So how is that typically done? The overall construction price is sliced up in a couple of pieces, and a lump sum is paid along each milestone. So these milestones can be signing the contract to start. That gives the developer the security that you don't run away, and also gives them the cash flow to start the construction. And then upon every milestone or major milestone in the development process, for example, having the foundation in place, you would pay the next lump sum in the process. Unfortunately, there's no standardized way to deal with this. For each of the phases of construction, you can pay upfront, you can pay at the end. As a buyer, you would rather pay in the end. For the developer, you would rather get the money upfront. You can also have some mix of both. You pay some money upfront, and upon successful delivery in time, you pay for the rest. Now, this takes into account that the profit is not earned by the developer until he has actually delivered his plot. And of course, extremely important, it gets towards the end of construction. Once you made the last partial payment as a buyer, you would be having a hard time to get anything more from the developer. So think about the warranty. The warranty starts with a handover and typically lasts for 1 year, actually depending on the legislation where you are, can be up to 5 years. Throughout this period, the developer needs to fix everything that comes up. Ideally, you withhold a small payment until the end of the warranty period, and only if everything is fixed, that payment will be released. Now that would be the ideal view of the buyer. However, it does not happen very often in real life. Typically, the developer makes a proposal on the payment schedule, and there's little room for negotiation from the buyer side. So when you review that payment schedule, always consider the overall sum. Try to extract the sales commission that is typically paid very early. Typically, the sales guy gets his money once the ink on the contract is dry. And once he has his money, it's quite likely you will never see him again. So let's separate that and keep it out. Now another part of that lump sum is what the developer calculates for his own profit. And that you should also extract and try to negotiate to bring it in a very late part of the construction process. So he should only make a profit when he really has delivered everything he's supposed to deliver. But of course the developer would prefer to get the profit all along the way, so he would not like to extract that mentally. And then of course you have cost for the land, typically, and that the developer needs to pay up front. And here it depends on the legal situation. If you get the title for the land in a smaller development, that might be an option, that you have a dedicated piece of land and you get the legal title for that. In that case, it is reasonable that you pay it as you get the legal title. In case of a condo, for example, where each of the units has a fractional ownership of the land underneath, legally that fractional ownership would only be in place and as a title available when the units are constructed and also legally established. So at the very end of the construction process. In that case, the developer needs to pay up front, but he can also use this title as a security for a bank loan to finance this land. And as a buyer, you would only pay for that once you get it. Now for the construction, try to break it down in a couple of reasonable sized chunks with a mindset to understand both sides in terms of risk and cash management. Each construction phase has an estimate of what it costs to build that and a time frame as well. Try to align the payment amount with the estimated cost for this construction period. And then you might split it up between before and after the construction. Now it's probably more realistic that you pay upfront for the next chunk of construction, but keep the money for the overall warranty, for the profit of the developer, possibly the land, for as late as possible. So typically with the handover, or some parts even at the end of the warranty period. When you think of the payment schedule, always consider both sides of the deal. Think of the developer. He has to pay a lot of bills along the construction process for the land, for the material, for the work. As a buyer, you only want to pay when there is something tangible that you are getting, and where in case the developer goes bankrupt, you can take over, hire another developer to continue the work from you. And always keep an eye on your current exposure, meaning how much have you paid for which there's no deliverable yet in place. And on the other hand, also consider the cash management. Neither of these parties wants a big chunk of money sitting in a bank account for nothing. It just costs money. There's no point on that. He needs the money when the work is done, when the material is paid, or the land is paid. So these two aspects should be reflected by the payment schedule. Now, one last thing that is quite common, and that is to have a penalty clause in case the developer does not deliver after a certain date. This refers to the final handover delivery. That's when the buyer wants to move in, or the buyer wants to take ownership of the construction. If that does not happen in time, then some kind of penalty payment, that can be like a daily pro rata of, let's say, 1% a month, something like that. And if the construction is delayed, then the developer needs to pay. If the developer goes bankrupt, that's not worth much. And if the developer never actually delivers, how is this penalty handled? So if there's no final payment to deduct it from, then do you actually reach out to the developer and try to get the money? You can try, but you might not be successful. The developer might be bankrupt, might not be there anymore. So this penalty payment is a common clause, and I definitely recommend to put it in, but in reality it's nothing to rely on. The key in terms of managing your risk is really having a solid payment schedule, only releasing the next payment when the deliverable is verified. So all this is really mostly to protect you as a buyer. And when you sign the contract, the handover and the warranty seems very far away, and you're not really in the mindset of thinking about defects in the construction, but it's very real. It will happen. Defects are basically always there after construction is completed. So have a good eye on these clauses in the contract and try to withhold some amount of money for the defects, and you have to negotiate that very early into the contract. So all this is the legal framework that must be in place. That is really what you can go back to when there is any problem during the construction and the cooperation with your developer. But do keep in mind that a good working relationship is key to make this project successful. So do write the contract in a reasonable way that protects both parties, then sign it, put it in the drawer, and hope that you never have to take it out. You would only take it out if there's any problem. So let's hope there will be no problem during the construction.